It is my honor and pleasure to welcome my very good friend and fellow elder, President Juan Manuel Santos, the former president of Colombia, to deliver the keynote speech, the last keynote speech of this year's Youth and Leaders Summit. Welcome to Paris, Juan Manuel. It's very good to see you. It is extremely kind of you to have accepted our invitation to participate in this seminar and actually to close it. So thank you very, very much indeed, and welcome, and to Cornelia Wall, who will be conducting your session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lakhdar Brahimi. We are extremely honored to close 3 days of intensive discussion with a keynote speech by Juan Manuel Santos, President of Colombia from 2010 and to 2018. His outstanding trajectory exemplifies how many different challenges one needs to address to improve human security. President Santos was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2016 for his, and I quote the committee, resolute efforts to bring the country's more than 50-year-long civil war to an end. During his tenure as Colombia's Minister of Defense from 2006 to 2009, he was able to inflict the severest blows to the FARC guerrillas in their 5 decades of existence and bring them to the negotiating table in order to develop a solution to bring peace to his country and the region. And his efforts went far beyond naive security considerations. During his time as president, he worked relentlessly to improve his country's social and economic indicators with innovative and successful policies to fight poverty and inequality. An economist by training, his approach is deeply connected to the work of his former professor, economics Nobel laureate Amartya Sen, and he continues to work with him on issues of human development. President Santos also gained numerous prizes and recognition for his aggressive environmental policies to protect Colombia's biodiversity and fight climate change. You can tell what a comprehensive approach to human security this is when you add it all together. Through President Santos' initiative, such a holistic approach is today etched in stone multilaterally. He was one of the promoters of the Sustainable Development Goals that became the world's agenda in 2015, after he officially proposed them in the Rio+20 summit in 2012. He also led the process to convene a special session of the General Assembly of the United Nations, UNGAS 2016, to discuss more effective ways to face the world drug problem. In addition, he was one of the founders and architects of the Pacific Alliance, the successful economic integration process in Latin America. It is difficult to imagine a more fitting speaker to close this Youth and Leaders Summit than to listen to your insights from over 30 years in government at the front lines, tackling these momentous challenges. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation to tell our students and our audience about your trajectory, which you summarize in the title of your talk as a journey from hawk to dove. Mr. President, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and it is a great honor to have been invited to close this seminar on an issue that is very close to my heart, war and peace. And it's especially important for me to address a seminar that is titled to the group of youth and leaders, because I think that gives me a chance to talk about my own experience and share with you some lessons that can be drawn from this experience. I had to make war in order to achieve peace. That is sometimes necessary. But when I made war, I made it in a different way, in a humane way. And this is a contradiction, but that's what we did. Try to humanize the war, because I was taught by a general, a very intelligent and philosophical general, that I should not treat the guerrillas as my enemies, but as my adversaries. They are human beings. And if I wanted peace afterwards, I had to treat them as human beings. And so the first thing I did in this war was to change the culture of the military, to tell them that they have to respect the human rights of the communities, but also of the guerrillas, of their adversaries. And that had a profound effect. For example, I inherited the doctrine that was invented in Vietnam, the body count. That was the way that my predecessor evaluated and measured the success of the officers. I changed that completely. I said, no body counts. Your success would be how many people from the guerrilla would become demobilized and would reintegrate into civil society. And that had a very, very profound effect. And I had to lead my country in war. That needs a particular type of leadership. It's a very vertical leadership. You give orders during the war, you rally the forces around you, and you go after your enemy or your adversary. And it's a quite simple type of leadership. But then things changed when I started to talk peace. It was difficult politically. I was warned that that transition would be a very difficult transition. People would not understand that I had been elected because I was a war hero as president, and that I was sitting with my adversaries to talk peace. But that was my objective since the beginning. I remember a former Minister of Foreign Relations of Israel, good friend of mine, Shlomo Ben-Ami, telling me, this will cost you your political capital, and even could cost you your life, as happened to the Prime Minister of Israel, Rabin, when he made peace with Arafat. And I had to suffer that. People started to call me a traitor because I sat down with the guerrillas. But it was a necessary step to pursue. I had identified some conditions that were necessary to have a successful peace process. All my predecessors tried to make peace with the FARC, the largest and oldest guerrilla movement in the Western Hemisphere, and they had failed. And so I identified the conditions that were necessary for a successful peace process, studying many other peace processes in South Africa, in Northern Ireland, in the Middle East, and I extracted what was applicable to Colombia. No conflict, no armed conflict is identical to another, but they have common denominators. So I learned from other peace processes, and I brought in people with hands-on experience. For example, the chief negotiator of Tony Blair in the Northern Ireland peace agreement, Jonathan Powell. I brought in Shlomo Ben-Ami, who had been an architect of the Oslo agreements. I brought in somebody called Joaquin Villalobos, who was the commander of the Salvadorian guerrillas and chief negotiator. And they became my personal advisors. And that was extremely helpful. So when I sat down to negotiate the peace, I also had to change the type of leadership that was needed to achieve peace. Instead of a vertical type of leadership, to make peace, you need a more horizontal type of leadership. Instead of giving orders, you need to persuade, you need to convince, among others, your adversaries that peace is better than war. But you also have to convince the population to support your peace process. And that is very difficult. You have to teach people, especially the victims, to have a more generous attitude towards your perpetrators. And that is very difficult to tell a mother to forgive, for example, somebody who had raped and killed her daughter. It's difficult, but you have to do that with a different type of leadership, persuading, having, and this is for me the most important attribute of any leader, having empathy, having compassion, to be able to put yourselves in the shoes of others if you're going to convince them of anything. And that is extremely important. And that's what I tried to do in the peace process. It was very difficult. It was much more difficult to make peace than to make war. And to make peace, you also have to take into account that in every conflict, there are two faces. One is the face of peacemaking, negotiating, convincing the enemy or the adversary to give up their arms and to reintegrate into civil society. And that is what is called peacemaking. But afterwards, there's a second phase, which is much more important and much more difficult, is the construction of peace. And that takes a lot of time. Many peace processes around the world have failed because that phase has not been properly addressed. The construction of peace, the reconciliation. And that needs a lot of patience, a lot of teachings, and a lot of time. I say it's like building a cathedral. You build the cathedral step by step, brick by brick. And that's what we're doing in Colombia right now after almost 5 years of signing the peace agreement. And we're still having many problems with both sides, because when you sign a peace, what you really decide is where you draw the line between peace and justice. And always there will be people who want more justice or people who want more peace. So you will always have political adversaries in a peace process. That is natural, that is normal, but you have to live with it and you have to handle it. It is a very happy coincidence that we are right in this moment, in this event, also observing the change of government in the US. And I think what I just told you is very relevant. The type of leadership that President Trump had was the type of leadership that is needed or usually is used during the times of war. Very vertical, authoritarian type of leadership. And you're seeing President Biden, that in a few minutes he will be sworn in, that he will need the type of leadership that is needed to make peace in order to unite the country, to reestablish relations with the rest of the world, to reestablish multilateralism, to reestablish cooperation among nations. And so it's very ironic that this seminar is ending exactly in the moment where there's such an important transition in the US government. And my advice to you as young leaders in terms of peace and war is that no matter how difficult peace can be, it's always better than war. A bad peace is always better than a good war. And that you have to take into account, and that is one of the key aspects of the Colombian peace agreement, the rights of the victims that usually are not taken care of. Their rights are extremely important to heal the wounds of the war. Their rights to the truth. Many victims told me, President, I don't want reparations. I don't want money. How much is my daughter or my son worth? I just need to know why they did this. So the truth is extremely important. And we have a truth commission. The rights to justice, but a different type of justice, something called a transitional justice. That is part of the Treaty of Rome that was negotiated to have a peaceful negotiation and peaceful resolution of armed conflicts. That type of justice is also difficult to sell to the public, but is needed, and we apply that justice in the Colombian case. And you need also to give guarantees of non-repetition. And that's what we're doing right now with the reconciliation of helping the victims, helping the former guerrilla members to have a better future and to accept them as your equals, to accept them as citizens, normal citizens, as I am a normal citizen. And that is extremely important. So empathy and compassion and perseverance are elements that always are important in any peace process. And they were key to the Colombian peace process. We have not finished. We have a long way to go because, among other things, and with this I will finish, I remember my indigenous communities when I got inaugurated. They said, go and make peace among human beings, but make peace also with nature, because we are at war with nature. And that is probably more serious than the war we're advancing among humans. And that is another war that you as young people must address. We are now in Paris, the Paris Agreement, and we see President Biden returning to the Paris Agreement. This war to reestablish our connection with nature is also extremely important. And that also needs perseverance, also needs persuasion, and also needs vision for the future, to have a better future. I am optimistic that after this pandemic, after we have all what we have seen, the suffering we have seen with this pandemic, that the lessons that are emerging will help us to address the problems that the world has right now and will face in the future. With this, I finish because I know we are short of time, and I am eager to answer any questions you have. And thank you very, very much for having me in this important event and at this important university.
Thank you very much, President Santos, for these remarks that are effectively very topical with the transition going on in Washington, D.C. We're able to imagine many aspects of what you said in different countries. And I have a first question coming in from students right now. I will read through them, but let me just ask you to be about one of the aspects you said are very important about not losing the peace, and that is the fine line between justice and peace. I would like to ask you, what to you is the ingredient to make sure that transitional justice works for people from both sides, those that demand more justice and those that want to have a peaceful relationship between the opposing parties? Can you list the ingredients that nobody should miss, please?
Yes, transitional justice, first of all, is a different type of justice. We are all accustomed to the punitive justice. If you commit a crime, you go to jail and you are punished. Transitional justice is more of a restorative justice. You have to restore the rights of the victims. And that means you don't have to go to jail, but you have to do something in order to repair the victims. And many people don't accept that. Many people want punitive justice. So the first thing you have to do is to explain to the population why transitional justice is important and why it's the only way to be able to sign a peace agreement. Because if you tell your other part, your adversaries, that they sign a peace agreement to go to jail for 40 years, well, they will never sign a peace agreement. So that's one element. The second element is no matter where you draw the line, many people, and if they want to criticize you politically, they will very easily criticize you saying you are negotiating impunity, because that person who committed crimes against humanity, war crimes, should go to jail at least 30 or 40 years. Look at the atrocities he did. And that is very sensitive. People react to that very positively. So it's difficult to sell the transitional justice. And it's very important to apply transitional justice to both parties. And that is what we're doing in Colombia. The military, who committed all kinds of crimes also, and all kinds of excesses, are also facing transitional justice. And they are happy with that, because otherwise they will have to face the International Criminal Court. And the International Criminal Court is much more punitive than the transitional justice. But it needs a lot of teaching, a lot of explanation, and permanently, because the enemies of peace, and there always are enemies of peace in any peace process, always take advantage of the apparent contradictions of transitional justice.
Thank you very much. We have several questions coming in, and I will group them on the current state of the peace process in Colombia. Questions are how you judge what is going on currently, and whether you feel that the prospects of the Havana peace agreements are still as strong as everybody hoped they were in 2016. And now that we have news of FARC ex-guerrillos and leaders of the peasant movement that are being killed, and possibly parts of the population who are very actively opposed to it. What are your thoughts on the prospects of the peace process currently?
No, I am very optimistic. The peace process is shielded constitutionally and politically. The Colombian peace process is the event in the world that has had more unanimous resolutions supporting it from the Security Council of the United Nations since the United Nations was created. So we have a tremendous political backing, international political backing. Our constitutional courts, our Congress has a very strong support for the peace process, and the population more and more is accepting the peace process. I lost a referendum for a tiny percentage, but I lost it, and I had to renegotiate the peace process with the people who were voting for the no, and that improved the peace process and improved the backing of the population. Right now, 95% of the guerrillas that submitted to the peace process and gave up their arms are in the process. They have not deserted, and things are advancing. We are having problems with, for example, the killings of social leaders and former guerrilla members by certain groups that don't agree with some of the points of the peace process, like, for example, giving back to the peasants the land that was taken away from them through violence. So those big landlords are killing these the people who are claiming the land or former guerrilla members. This is something that this government should address with more political will. We have a very important filter right now. This government was against the peace process. So the fact that almost 3 years after this president was inaugurated, the peace process is continuing to advance, and he himself is saying that he supports the peace process. This is a very important step forward, but we must continue, we must persevere.
You mentioned the referendum, and I have a question from Sophia on that referendum that asks about your opinion on what the part is of popular endorsement of a peace process. Would you repeat a referendum as early as you did? You said you think the renegotiation improved the process, so I suspect you still feel that it contributed to it, but is a referendum a good thing to do that early in the process?
Looking back, of course, I would say no, because I lost it. But it was a promise that I made since the beginning of the peace process, and I wanted to fulfill that promise. I learned a lesson: beware of referendums, and especially in today's world, with fake news and with social media, it's very easy to manipulate public opinion and to manipulate referendums. Look at what I consider, because they were almost simultaneous, what happened with Brexit, all the lies that were made about Brexit. The same with the referendum in Colombia. They said that I was a communist, that I was going to give Russia, Colombia, that the pensions of the Colombians were going to go to the guerrillas, and many people believe that. I underestimated the power of fake news and the power of manipulation of the public opinion with lies. And so I learned a lesson, and my answer would be, if I had to repeat it, I would not make a referendum.
Thank you. I have two questions that I will combine into one with several aspects, and then you pick from Sunniva and Eva on the current peace process again. One is about the uncertainties that appear during a transition period for many communities who might be worse off now that there's a power vacuum, that there are different structures and some uncertainties. How does one deal with these uncertainties for the communities that are negatively affected by the transition period? And because the Colombia Peace Accords are very comprehensive, including gender-specific needs, now that you look back and that we see during the health crisis some of the challenges for these gender-specific needs, what can be done to ensure a comprehensive inclusion of women into the process of transitional justice?
Let me start with the last question. I'm very proud that this is the only peace agreement that has a special chapter for women and for the ethnic communities. And why did I do that? Why did we include that? Because this is an agreement that was based on the rights of the victims. We put the victims in the middle, in the heart of the negotiations. And who are the more victims of the victims in this type of asymmetrical wars? Women. So we wanted to give women a special presence in the negotiation process, but especially in the reconciliation process. And that's why we included a special chapter in the peace agreement, a gender chapter. The same with the ethnic communities, the Afro-Colombians, the indigenous communities. They have suffered more, like in the pandemic, with the war. And we wanted to give them also a special place in the post-conflict scenario. Now, going to the first part of your question, we need more presence of the state in those areas where the FARC left, and we had negotiated with the guerrillas that some very specific development plans would be created, would be negotiated with the communities, and that we did that for 2 years. And these specific plans have to be implemented. I must say, I must recognize that this government has tried to implement part of these plans, but they have to do much more in order for those people to feel that peace was good for them. But you go to many other places and you see the tremendous difference of the people saying, we are living in a new country without the FARC, without the violence that we used to live with. Don't forget that this is the oldest armed conflict in the whole of the Western Hemisphere. And I had not lived one single year of my life in peace. And now I can go anywhere I want in Colombia as any Colombian. And this is a dramatic change, but we have to continue constructing the peace.
I have a different question, a more personal question. You've been recognized for your work with many prizes and awards. And I have Lorenzo, who is interested to know what it feels like to be awarded a Nobel Peace Prize.
Well, something that is important in any negotiation and in your life, you always have to embrace humility. And I have accepted these prizes not in my name. I'm just one person who was at the right place and did took the right decisions. I accepted in my speech the Nobel Peace Prize and the other prizes in the names of the Colombians, but especially of the victims. The victims taught me many lessons. For example, I thought the victims were going to be the most aggressive against transitional justice. And I learned that no, they were the most generous. And I will tell you an anecdote that for me was extremely touching. This lady from the north of Colombia, her father was killed, her husband was killed, her brother was killed, and her son was tortured and killed. And 15 days after her son was tortured and killed, somebody wounded came to her to ask for help, and she helped him. And when he was cured, he went out of his bed and saw a picture of this lady with a young person, said, and this wounded person who was cured said, "Is that your son?" And he started crying. And he said, "Yes, this is my son. Why do you ask?" And he said, "Because," and he knelt down and said, "Because I have to tell you, I was the one who tortured and killed your son." And she was shocked. And suddenly she embraced him. And he was then shocked. "Why do you embrace me? I killed and tortured your son." And she said, "Because of what you just did, of recognizing and asking for forgiveness, you have liberated me from hating the rest of my life." This is a very touching anecdote of the many anecdotes that I have in my relation with the victims that taught me as a human being in this peace process. And this is something I will take with me to my grave with great satisfaction.
Thank you for this answer. I will go back to more scholarly questions. I have Agathe and Manuel who are interested in some definitions, and we like definitions. So could you expand a little bit more on what a humane war exactly is and what you mean by distinguishing between an enemy and an adversary? And on the other side, would you be able to define peace? How do we recognize peace when we see it?
When I sat with this general, he went to me and said, "I know that you're becoming Minister of Defense. You have to lead the war, but that you want in the end peace. So don't treat the FARC as your enemies, because the enemies you eliminate, the adversaries, you beat them, but you don't eliminate them. They're human beings. And you will have to, sooner or later, live with them, because we are the sons and daughters of the same nation." Those words for me were very important. And that's what took me to change the whole culture of how we were addressing the war. What do I mean by humanize the war? As I said, instead of the body count that was the way to measure the effectiveness of an officer, I said, from now on, the new military doctrine is how many people demobilize, how many people you can convince to lay out their arms and come to the side. They will give you information. They will not create a victim in the other side. So militarily, it's better. And from the human side, you save a life. And I said to them, if you have a member of the FARC who is wounded, take him to hospital. Don't kill him. And they started to do that. And that changed completely the dynamic of the war. What the guerrillas, the commanders of the guerrillas tell me today, now we speak to each other as normal citizens, they said, what you did completely destabilized us. We start seeing people demobilize at a much faster rate. We didn't understand what was happening. And that was very, very fundamental in our decision to go to the negotiation table and make peace.
Thank you. I have several questions still about the peace process, and I will group some of them which are related to the emotional aspects of parts of the population. Aurélie asked, given that there is so much that is very deeply rooted, how do you counter propaganda that comes and continues building up in the years following a peace process? What are ways of alleviating some of these very strong emotions and or feelings of injustice on the victim side, asked Mohammed, if you're a victim of terror during a transition period? How do you handle very much the emotion and how these emotions can be manipulated in the process as it's going on?
This is one of the biggest challenges in that second phase of what I call the reconciliation, or the construction of peace. With some people, it takes a short time. With other people, it takes a long time. And with some people, it's impossible. You need to address the social, the psycho situation, the psychological situation of many of the victims. Help them with doctors, with specialists. You need to address the communities to reestablish the moral fabric of the communities. That takes time. For example, the money that I was given by the Nobel Peace, I invested in a foundation that does exactly that, brings people from the communities that were destroyed by the war to help the leaders of those communities build a new community on more healthy and more solid principles and values. And this takes time. And it's a difficult job, and you need to persevere. And the injustices, when you hear many stories, you say, well, there's no way to repair these victims. You understand how deep the wound is. But what you cannot do is simply to throw in the towel. You need to persist if you want to have a long-lasting peace.
I have two questions that will make you travel a little bit, but not a lot. One is from Razan, who would like to know if we compare, even though you said it's very difficult to compare processes which are never quite alike, but if we compare the Colombian peace process with others, other conflicts, internal conflicts that are going on today, what lessons can be learned? And if you look now at the incoming President Biden, ask Christina, what do you expect from him with respect to peace and reconciliation of the countries in Latin America, especially Venezuela?
Well, there are some cases, for example, Afghanistan. One of the fundamental moves that I made in Colombia was to bring the region into the peace process, to bring Venezuela, to bring Ecuador, to bring Brazil, and the international community. That was extremely important. And I had to make peace with Chavez, who was my enemy. He and I had very bad relations, but I said, if I want to make peace, I need Chavez. So I extended my hand and we made peace with Chavez. The same with Ecuador, who, as Minister of Defense, I had bombed a camp in Ecuador, and he was very, very against me because of that, with good reason. But I also made peace with him, and he helped me in the peace process. So the support of the region and of the international community is very important in any peace process, in any asymmetrical war today. Afghanistan, or you go to Yemen, or wherever, you need the region and the international community helping in this peace process. Now, what do I expect from Joe Biden? He was extremely helpful. I am honored to consider him, or he considers me his friend. He was the person who, the special envoy that was nominated by President Obama, Bernie Aronson, special envoy for the peace process. The person he informed was President Biden. And just a week before I left office, he went to Colombia to say goodbye and to support the peace process. So I have no doubt that his attitude will be 180 degrees different from the attitude of Trump, who was he even in the campaign denounced this terrible triangle: Obama, Biden, Santos, who made an agreement to give Colombia to the communists and to the drug dealers. That type of fake news was given by President Trump during that campaign. So I am very conscious of Biden's commitment to peace. And in Venezuela, my feeling is that you need to create the conditions, and this is very possible, for the major stakeholders that can build a golden bridge for the Maduro regime to have a peaceful and hopefully prompt transition towards democracy in Venezuela. I think that Biden can play a very important role. One of the problems we have in Latin America is a total lack of leadership. So he can, in a way, fill that vacuum, bring the stakeholders, which are Russia, China, Cuba, even Iran, to the table, and bring the United Nations and build this golden bridge that will help this in this peaceful transition towards democracy. And I, as a Colombian, am the most interested, because the country that suffers the most with the Venezuelan tragedy, besides Venezuela, is Colombia.
And I have two more questions back to the peace process in Colombia. Renaud asks about the socioeconomic inequalities, the exploitation of resources, and the interests of the landed elites that are linked to some of the difficulties of the country. And he would like to know if you feel that these issues are adequately tackled. And Ana Lucia adds or asks if you foresee a comprehensive land reform in Colombia.
The number one point in the peace agreement is called comprehensive rural reform, which addresses precisely that problem. Unfortunately, this government has not implemented that part of the agreement. It's the obligation of any president for the next 3 governments to implement the agreement. That's what our constitution says. That's what our peace agreement said. And this is very urgent because Colombia has one of the worst land distribution in the whole world. And that's why we included that point in the peace agreement. And that is one of the demands that people are making to this government for the implementation of the agreement. And I hope that I don't have a lot of optimism that this government will do that, but I am sure that in the campaign for the next government, which will be next year, this issue is going to be a fundamental issue. And addressing the inequalities. I made something quite innovative, which was bring the theories of one of my former teachers, Amartya Sen, to Colombia and apply them and attack poverty, not in the traditional way that the World Bank or the IMF says, and measuring poverty by how much you earn, but something called a multi-dimensional poverty. And that's why Colombia, in the last decade, was a country in Latin America that could say that the poverty, extreme poverty, and inequality was reduced more than any other country. However, we have a long way to go.
I have a career advice question from Maya, or I'll formulate it as career advice. What would you consider as the key qualities for a mediator in a peace process?
Well, I personally took the decision not to use mediators, but sometimes they are necessary. I would say that the mediator has to have the trust of both parties. This is extremely important, that he will not help one or the other, that he has international credibility, that he can have the authority to say things when he sees something that is going wrong. But I would say that besides the normal characteristics of a mediator, of having the techniques of negotiation and what you learn in a university, besides that, trust and empathy is extremely important. The mediator has to understand the negotiators of both parts. What are their concerns? What are their pressures? What is it that for them is important? And if he has that characteristic, if he has that empathy, he will be a good mediator.
I have several more questions on the peace building process, which we really want to hear your insights about in some more detail, because a lot of the students and the audience is interested in understanding more what the greatest threats are to the peace process. What keeps you up at night if you still see it unfolding in Colombia now? How do you manage the construction of a collective historical memory after the war in Colombia? And how do you make sure that former guerrilla members have really accepted the process, don't change their minds, or are not mobilized again in some way?
Well, fortunately, the guerrillas that entered the peace process, all of them, or most of them, continue to say, we are the peace process, and we will not go. We will not go back to war, whatever happens. And I believe that they made this promise and that they are committed to that. What worries me, what is my concern here? It's a concern that is happening all around the world with the social media, with populism, with the manipulation of fear. And since we are a country that has been so violent and that we have not been able to leave that image behind us, we still have many people who have suffered this violence, well, it's much easier to manipulate. And we have populist people who are experts in using fear to manipulate the public opinion, and we're seeing that. We're seeing in Colombia the same thing we saw in the campaign in the United States against Biden. Biden is a communist, a socialist, and he will take the United States to be a new Venezuela or a new Cuba. We heard that many times in the campaign, said by people, even by Trump. Well, that happens in Colombia. That is a Colombian-made strategy of inventing an enemy, inventing a phantom that creates fear for political reasons. And we're seeing that right now, and hopefully the people will not follow that type of populism, because then that type of populism can take us again to confrontations that might end up in violence. But this is something that we have to face, we have to address. And as I say, not only in Colombia, we're seeing that in many countries around the world.
Thank you. I have a question from Mathilde, who would like to come back to the question of Venezuela. You spoke of your relationship with Chavez. How can Venezuela achieve peace in your mind? And is there a reason for Colombia to intervene, for example, on military grounds?
Well, I think that any military intervention from Colombia or from any other country, and I said this to President Trump when he asked me about the possibility of a military intervention. I said to him, this is the worst of any solution, because that will generate hundreds of thousands of people dying. Venezuela, I told Trump, is not Panama, is not Grenada that you invaded. Venezuela is a big country, very convenient for guerrilla warfare, as Colombia is. And so this is the worst of all solutions. I believe that, as we did in Colombia, if you identify the necessary conditions for a successful negotiation and create those conditions, that a peaceful solution is possible. You have, as I said before, to build a golden bridge for the regime that has to be accepted by the international community, by the United Nations, which I think this would be no problem, and by the opposition in Venezuela. The hardline approach failed. What Trump tried to do with the complicity of the Colombian government, of trying to pressure diplomatically and with sanctions Venezuela, that failed. Today, Maduro is relatively stronger than what he was a year or 2 years ago. So we need a negotiation. Maduro knows that he is in a tremendous problem, that his social and economic indicators are the worst ones, and they will continue to get worse even, and that a good negotiation for him would be the best way out. But you have to build that slowly but surely, like a simultaneous chess game. For example, Cuba. Cuba is a very important country with a tremendous influence on Venezuela. But what Pompeo and the United States did just a week ago of declaring Cuba as part of the country that harbored terrorism, that is exactly what you don't have to do. You have to try to convince Cuba, as Obama did, to help in the peace process in in Venezuela to help the transition, and they would be willing if the United States also makes a gesture to Cuba, as Obama did. And I think that is necessary. I hope Biden does it. I know it will face tremendous resistance from those ultra-right sectors of the political spectrum in the Republican Party, especially in South Florida. But I truly believe that that would be an important step in order to be able to have a peaceful transition in Venezuela. And I think the moment is now that we have a new government in the US. We tried to do that with Trump. And Trump simply did not want to have anything to do with Cuba. Say Cuba is out of the question. We don't want to give any concessions to Cuba. Well, you see the result. Nothing was done.
Thank you. I have a lot of questions still coming in that are interested also in the relationship between the peace process and some of the illegal activities that are related to drug trafficking now that benefit from some of the impunity. I would, because we are coming close to the time closing, I would like to apologize to all the audience members whose question I did not pose to you. Some of them are still flowing on my screen, but let me invite you to say something final with two questions that speak nicely to another. One from Dimi, who reads you closely and who must have read a quote from you stating, "Today, we must acknowledge that war has not been won." And he would like to know what you were trying to say with this phrase. And one from Manuel, who asks quite simply if you would say today that Colombia is a country in peace.
When you go to a negotiating table, you need to address realities, and in the case of Colombia, the war had not been won. We were been fighting for 50 years, more than 50 years, and the guerrillas were there, and after 50 years, it has not been won. And you mentioned something about drugs, and let me address that issue very, very briefly. Colombia has been the country that has suffered more in the world war against drugs. No country has suffered more than Colombia. And I personally have been in the forefront of this drug war. I have eradicated more coca hectares than any other person in the world. I've sprayed more hectares than any other person in the world. I have extradited more drug traffickers to the United States than any other person. I have confiscated more tons of drugs than any other person. And now I am convinced that the only solution to the war on drugs is legalization. After everything that I did by the book, my deep conviction today is that the only real solution is to legalize and regulate the drug traffic. Otherwise, you will continue with this war that, as usual, the poorest and the more vulnerable are the ones that suffer the most. Is Colombia at peace? Well, Colombia is at peace with the FARC. There's no doubt. We still have problems. We have the ELN, that's another much smaller guerrilla group that is now in a way protected by Venezuela. And we have criminal bands that have emerged or were present that are dedicated to drug trafficking. And we have to address those pockets of violence. So we're still not a country with complete peace, but we have made a very important advance, especially by ending the oldest and largest armed conflict in the Western Hemisphere, which was the war with the FARC.
Thank you very much for this comprehensive answer. You did answer 4 questions, including by Jenny and Christina. So this was very helpful as a concluding comment to this very interesting discussion. President Santos, it was a true privilege to have you answer all of our questions and give so much detail about your insights. And I would like to thank you very warmly for the audience and for ourselves, and hand over the floor to Dean Letta and Lakhdar Brahimi. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cornelia, dear Cornelia. It was really a fascinating final keynote speech. I'd like to thank President Santos. Muchísimas gracias por sus palabras. And thank you so much also for giving the opportunity of some of our students now to interact with you. It's a great pleasure, and thank you. And we hope to have you soon here in Paris when it will be possible to interact with our students. Thank you very much.
You have by your side one of my professors. Lakhdar is one of my professors. Many of the things I said, he knows much better than I do. So
this is why now it's time for our main architect, the main architect since the beginning of the Youth and Leaders Summit 6 years ago, when we started in 16. And I would like to thank you, Lakhdar, for your wisdom, for the way in which you helped us in organizing this event, the present event. And I give you the floor for the conclusions.
Thank you very much, Enrico. Again, thank you for your participation with us, Juan Emmanuel. And I will keep my promise about dinner when you come to Paris.
I hope so.
To everyone who is still with us around the world, in spite of the different time zones where everybody is, I would like to express my happiness and satisfaction that we have come to the conclusion of the 6th Youth and Leaders Summit. And I think everybody will agree that it has been, a fantastic success. My own remarks will be very, very short and simple. It will be for you, my dear Enrico, to provide the substantive conclusion. You always give me much more credit than I deserve, whereas the reality is that you have been in the lead in this effort from 2015, when the idea came out from you and we started talking about it. You have led the preparation and the actual taking place of every one of the 6 summits. You have been helped during all this time by a very, very small team led by Vice Dean of PSIA, Mark Maloney, and including Michele, Marie Zenaid, Isabel, Patty, and Alice Chubel. To all of them, my deep gratitude and warmest congratulations. They have performed, each one of them, to a higher standard than anyone had the right to expect of them. Congratulations and gratitude are also due to the students who volunteered to help and did so very effectively. In fact, visibly, the role of students in this conference has been increasing year after year, and I am confident it will continue to grow. Back in January 2016, at the end of the very first summit, I congratulated you, Enrico, very warmly for the success of your idea. But I said also then, I told you also then, that with this great success, you have set the bar very, very high. 1 year from now, I hope that you can reach the same high bar. You did year after year, and I don't know where you are going to stop. How high are you going to raise the bar? With the support of President of Sciences Po, Frédéric Millon, and everyone in PSIA, you have decided this year, against all odds, to have this experiment of organizing such a huge conference entirely online. And the experiment has been a resounding success. I think we can say it now. And all participants, I'm sure, agree with that. So once again, I say to you, my dear Enrico, bravo, warm compliments to you, to your team, to the students. But you once again have set the bar very high. And where do we go from here? Once again, you are actually challenging yourself and your team and the students and all of us to make sure that you do next year at least as well as you have done this year. So thank you again and good luck.
Thank you so much, Lakhdar. I think your words were so kind for me, with the team, with all of us, but they are pushing us to work immediately for the next Youth and Leaders Summit. And I would like to end up here, first of all, with, we have a very short video, but I attach a big importance to this video. So I like to ask you to follow the video, because in this video, you have the names of all the students, volunteers. Thanks to them, we achieved this great satisfaction that was being here and being able to have all these speakers, all these panels. It is thanks to them, and I would like really to congratulate them also for how professional, how effective, how good was their work. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I hope you enjoyed also working with us in this Youth and Leaders Summit. This edition, as Lakhdar just said, is an exceptional edition. First of all, because we are online and because it was so strange to change completely the way in which we worked in 16 and since 16. But working online gave us some more opportunities. And I would like to mention the fact that we decided to exploit and to take opportunity of these new tools. And thanks to the new tools, thanks to all the fantastic team here at Sciences Po, I would like to thank them. They are in the studio now. They were fantastic for 3 days. It was really a great success on media, on social media. Of course, now it's a little bit difficult to be successful in this very moment because there's another event in another part of the world that is taking place with some attention. And we are very lucky, and we are very happy also to say these words in the moment in which in Washington, D.C., something so big is happening. But I would like to to take the opportunity to thank also our team, PSIA team, under the leadership of the executive director and Vice Dean Mark Maloney. I have to say thank, first of all, to Marie-Zenaïde Joly, who is in charge for the events. Then Isabelle Paty, who is not only my assistant, but who is the pillar of our school. I'd like to thank Michele Bellini. I would like to thank Alice Judel. I would like to thank all those in Sciences Po and at Sciences Po under the leadership of Frédéric Millon, who was with us as usual at the beginning of our event, who helped us in this success. Without the contribution of the New York Times, it would have been impossible to have this success. It is our 4th edition in which this cooperation and this media partnership with the New York Times is for us an honor, privilege, and a success. We have their journalists with us. We have, of course, the possibility to have our brand and their brand together. I'd like to thank also Microsoft for the support. With Microsoft, we will start a very positive cooperation for the rest of the year. We will organize some events. We will try to challenge them on some subject. It will be, I think, interesting for the students. And I would like to end up with you, with the students, because Lakhdar just mentioned one point that is, I think, the most important point. When we started in January 16, we were talking on the UN, the future of the UN. We had many speakers, but at the end of the day, I have to say that this event was in some way a traditional event. And I think, Lakhdar, you can allow me to say that it was a successful event, but it was a little bit a traditional event. We organized the event. We asked speakers to come. Students were the audience. Yes, they were able to ask questions, but they were mostly the audience of a traditional event. Then we decided to bet on our students. And today we are able to say that the success of this 6th edition is because of the students. They decided the subject. They worked for the organization of the event. They were decisive in all the different aspects. They decided to run in a fantastic way the panels. They attended panels at the same level of speakers. They were able to introduce our keynote speakers and the different panelists. They had the breakout sessions with the panelists. A fantastic opportunity to show how good you are. And so thank you very much for your commitment. Now, as Lakhdar said, the bar is very high for next year, but I ask you immediately to start thinking the topic for next year, to start thinking the way in which the 7th edition of Youth and Leaders Summit can be as successful as it is today, the 6th edition. Thank you very much. Stay safe, stay healthy. See you soon. À Sciences Po.